If you had done something with your life, I wouldn't have to explain you to people. She said it calmly, not angry, not loud, which somehow made it worse. 30 people were sitting at that table. Forks paused, eyes lowered, and no one said a word. Because in that room, the story about me had already been decided. The failure, the dropout, the one who never quite became anything. And for 7 years, I let them believe it. What they didn't know, what no one at that table knew, was that the version of me they pitied didn't exist anymore. But here's the part that still keeps me up at night. The truth didn't come out because I chose to tell it. It came out because something happened that none of us could control. And when it did, it didn't just expose me, it exposed everything. So let me ask you something. If the people closest to you spent years telling the wrong story about your life, would you correct them? Or would you stay silent and build something they could never take from you? And if stories like this mean something to you, the kind that stay with you long after they end, take a moment to subscribe. You might not need this story today, but one day you might. Now, before that night, before the silence in that room broke all at once, this story actually began with a phone call at 2:04 in the morning and a choice that cost me everything. March of 2017 didn't feel important at the time. It felt like any other week in a life that was finally starting to take shape. I was 21, a junior in college, computer science major, not the best in my class, but I worked hard. The kind of hard that doesn't look impressive from the outside, but costs you something on the inside. Late nights, missed invitations, a quiet kind of determination that no one really notices until it's gone. That night, my phone rang at 2:04 a.m. There's something about a call at that hour. Your body knows before your mind does. Nothing good ever comes through the phone at 2 in the morning. I remember sitting up in bed, staring at the screen for half a second longer than I should have. It wasn't my mother. It wasn't my father. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered anyway. Hello. A pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in years. Ivy, honey. It's Ruth, your grandmother's neighbor. My heart dropped. Not fast, but heavy. She collapsed in the kitchen. The ambulance just took her. They think it's a stroke. For a moment, everything in the room felt too still. My roommate shifted in her sleep. The hum of the heater filled the silence, and I was already standing, pulling on shoes, grabbing my keys, not even thinking. I called my mother first. It rang. Once, twice, 5 times. Then she picked up. What, Ivy? It's 2 in the morning. Grandma had a stroke. She's at St. Vincent's. There was a pause. Not the kind that comes from fear or concern. The kind that comes from inconvenience. She's old, my mother said. That's what happens. I waited for something else. A question. A shift in tone. Anything that sounded like love. It didn't come. I have a deposition in the morning, she added. Call your sister. And then the line went dead. I stood there, phone still in my hand, trying to understand how something so big could feel so small to someone else. I called my sister next. She answered faster. Ivy? I can't. I have exams. You know how it is. It's Grandma, I said. I know, she replied. And somehow, that made it worse, because she did know, and she still chose distance. I drove 4 hours that night. No music, no coffee, just the road, stretching out in front of me, and the quiet realization settling in behind me. No one else was coming. By the time I reached the hospital, the sky was still dark. Fluorescent lights, cold floors, that sterile smell that never quite leaves your clothes. They had her in the ICU, machines humming softly, tubes running into arms that used to braid my hair when I was a child. The left side of her body, completely still. I stood there for a long time before I stepped closer, because there's a moment When you see someone you love like that, and you realize nothing is going back to the way it was. She opened her eyes, slowly, like it took effort just to return to the room. And when she saw me, she didn't panic. She didn't cry. She reached for my hand. Her grip was weak, uneven, but it was there. And she said something. Just one sentence, soft, almost lost behind the oxygen mask. I won't tell you what she said. Not yet, because that sentence changed everything that came after. The doctor spoke to me later that morning. 6 to 12 months of rehabilitation, physical therapy, full-time assistance. Someone would need to be there every day to help her move, eat, recover. I asked about care options. He handed me a brochure. I looked at the numbers and almost laughed. $40 an hour, more than I made in a week back then. I sat in the waiting area, holding that paper, watching people walk past me like their lives were still intact. And that's when it became clear, not gradually, not gently, but all at once, no one else was going to do this. Not my mother, not my sister, no one, just me. The following Monday, I walked into my academic advisor's office. Professor Donnelly, kind man, always had coffee on his desk and a way of looking at you like you mattered. I need to take a leave, I said. He didn't argue, didn't question it. He just nodded slowly, like he understood more than I was saying. Family, he asked. I nodded. He signed the paperwork. I signed it too. And just like that, the life I had been building, quietly, carefully, over years, was put on hold with a single signature. I packed my dorm room into 4 boxes, drove back to Bridgeport, set up a hospital bed in my grandmother's living room. And that night, as I stood in her kitchen, watching her sleep under dim light, I realized something I didn't have words for yet. I hadn't just changed my path. I had stepped into a story that someone else would soon begin to rewrite. And once that story started spreading, it wouldn't belong to me anymore. The first lie didn't sound like a lie. That's how these things usually begin. It sounded gentle, almost protective. She needed some time off school, my mother told people, just figuring things out. At first, I didn't correct her. I told myself it didn't matter, that the truth would surface on its own, that people would ask, that someone would be curious enough to hear my side. No one did, because when a story is told calmly, confidently, and often enough, it becomes truth in the room. And I was never the one telling it. That summer, there was a 4th of July barbecue at my Aunt Linda's house. I almost didn't go, but my grandmother wanted to see everyone. And by then, she had just started to sit up on her own again. Small victories, the kind you don't celebrate loudly, but feel deeply. So I pushed her wheelchair across the backyard, past the laughter, the smell of grilled food, the sound of children running through sprinklers. And I felt it immediately, that shift in the air, the way conversation softened when I got close, the way eyes lingered, then looked away too quickly. Aunt Linda was the first to approach me. Her hand rested lightly on my arm. Are you okay, honey? I nodded. Your mom told us. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I glanced across the yard. My mother stood near the drink table, surrounded by relatives, her expression soft, concerned, carefully composed. She looked like someone carrying a burden, and I realized I was the burden. That's not exactly what happened, I said quietly. My aunt opened her mouth, but before she could respond, Ivy, please? Not here. My mother's voice carried across the yard, soft enough to sound reasonable, loud enough for everyone to hear. Every head turned, not toward her, toward me, like I was the one creating tension, like I had brought something uncomfortable into a place that had already decided what was true. I felt my grandmother's hand tighten slightly on my wrist, not to stop me, just to remind me this wasn't the moment. So I said nothing, and that silence gave her story room to grow. Months passed. My grandmother improved slowly, But the routine never changed. Mornings helping her dress, afternoons at physical therapy, evenings cooking, cleaning, managing medications. And late at night, when the house was finally quiet, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, learning, teaching myself what I hadn't finished in school: Python, JavaScript, system design. Not because anyone expected it of me, but because something inside me refused to disappear completely. That's when the opportunity came. A small software company in Hartford. They were offering an internship. No degree required, just skill. I applied, and for the first time in months, something opened. The interview went well, better than I expected. The hiring manager smiled. "You're exactly what we're looking for." I remember walking out of that building, feeling something unfamiliar. Hope. Real steady hope. I got the offer 2 days later. I didn't celebrate. Didn't tell anyone. Not my mother. Not my sister. Just my grandmother. She smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't need words. I was supposed to start the following Monday, but Friday afternoon, my phone rang. The number looked familiar. I answered immediately, and something in her voice was already different. "Miss Colton, I'm sorry. We've received some concerning information." My chest tightened. What kind of information? A pause. "A family member reached out. They expressed concerns about your reliability." I didn't speak, because somewhere inside me, I already knew. We're going to have to rescind the offer. The call ended shortly after that. Polite, professional, final. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my hands, trying to understand how something I had built for myself had been taken away so easily. Not by a stranger, not by bad luck, but by someone who knew exactly what it meant to me. That evening, I drove to my mother's house. She was outside, watering plants like nothing had changed. "Did you call them?" I asked. She didn't look surprised. "I don't know what you're talking about." I stepped closer. "Someone from my family told them I wasn't reliable." She set the watering can down, looked at me, the way you look at someone who just doesn't understand how the world works. "Maybe they just didn't want you," she said. "Did you think about that?" The words landed clean, sharp, designed to end the conversation, not continue it. She turned and walked inside, leaving me standing there, with something settling deep in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Clarity, because in that moment, I understood something I hadn't been willing to see before. This wasn't just misunderstanding. This wasn't just a story getting out of control. Someone was making sure I stayed exactly where they had placed me. And for the first time, I stopped trying to correct the story, because I realized I was never meant to win inside it. So I went home that night, sat down at the same kitchen table, opened my laptop, and made a decision. If they needed a version of me to talk about, I would give them one. Quiet, unremarkable, easy to dismiss, and everything real. I would build somewhere they couldn't reach, because the next time something was taken from me, it wouldn't be because they knew where to look. There's a kind of life that doesn't look like progress from the outside. It looks quiet, small, unremarkable, but inside, it's where everything begins. My days didn't change much at first. Mornings with my grandmother, helping her sit up, guiding her steps, counting out pills with careful hands. Afternoons running errands, grocery bags in one arm, her wheelchair in the other. And nights, that was when my real life started. After she fell asleep, after the house went still, I opened my laptop. No announcements, no plans to impress anyone, just work. I rebuilt everything I thought I had lost, line by line, code by code. I took online courses, watched lectures at half speed, so I wouldn't miss anything. I practiced until things that once felt impossible became familiar. Not easy, just possible. Weeks turned into months, months into a year, and slowly, something began to take shape. It started with small projects, a bakery that needed a website, a landscaping company that wanted online bookings, a dentist's office that couldn't keep track of appointments. $15 an hour, sometimes $20, if they didn't argue too much. It wasn't impressive, but it was mine. And every dollar had a purpose. Medication, rent, keeping the lights on. Nothing wasted, nothing extra. There were nights I fell asleep at the table, head resting next to a keyboard that was still warm. Mornings where my eyes burned, but the day still had to start. No one clapped for that. No one saw it. And strangely, that made it easier, because there was no pressure to perform, only space to build. The idea came quietly, not all at once, but in pieces. I had been working with a small freight company in New Haven. They were struggling with logistics, scheduling, tracking, delays that cost them time and money. I offered to help. At first, just small fixes. But the more I looked at their system, the more I realized there wasn't a real solution built for businesses like theirs. Everything was either too expensive or too complicated. So I started building something just for them. A tool, simple, practical, designed for the way they actually worked, not the way someone in a glass office thought they should. I didn't think of it as a business. Not yet. Just a solution. But when the owner called me 2 weeks later, his voice carried something I hadn't heard before. Excitement. "Ivy, this thing you built. It saved us almost 10 hours this week." 10 hours. I sat with that number for a long time, because time was something I understood. Time was everything I had given up, everything I was trying to rebuild. And suddenly, I wasn't just helping one company. I had built something that could help many. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the screen, looking at what I had created. And for the first time, I saw it differently. Not as a project, but as something real, something scalable, something that could grow, quietly, the same way I had. I made a decision. No announcement, no conversation, just a quiet step forward. I filed the paperwork, chose a name, Juniper Labs. Juniper was my grandmother's middle name, and I registered under a different identity, Ivy Parker, not to hide, but to protect, because the last time something had my real name on it, someone made a phone call, and it disappeared. I wasn't going to let that happen again. From that point on, everything changed. I worked longer hours, took on fewer freelance clients, focused only on building the platform. I reinvested every dollar, upgraded my equipment, improved the system, fixed what didn't work, then fixed it again. There were no guarantees, no investors, no one checking in, just me, and a belief I couldn't fully explain. Year 1, 3 clients, small companies, word spreading slowly, not through ads, but through conversations. Drivers talking to other drivers, owners mentioning it at loading docks, real recommendations from people who needed it. It grew, not fast enough to impress anyone, but steady enough to survive. And survival was all I needed, because something was building under the surface, something no one in my family could see, something they couldn't interrupt or rewrite or take credit for. By the end of the second year, I wasn't guessing anymore. I had data, revenue, clients who stayed. I hired my first developer, then another, all remote, all quiet, no website announcing our success, no social media, just results. And still, every Thanksgiving, I sat at that same table, listening to the same story about who I was. The dropout, the one figuring things out. I never corrected it, not once, because by then, I understood something they didn't. Truth doesn't need to be announced when it's already growing. And by the third year, it was no longer small. It was moving faster than I expected, faster than I could fully control. And then one phone call came in from a number I had never seen before. San Francisco, I answered. And within 30 seconds, everything I had built in silence was about to become impossible to keep hidden. The call from San Francisco wasn't loud. No dramatic music, no sudden realization, just a calm voice on the other end of the line. "Hi, is this Ivy Parker?" For a second, I almost didn't answer, because that name only existed in one part of my life. The part no one else knew. Yes, I said. This is Daniel from Linen Equity Partners. We've been reviewing your platform. A pause. We'd like to talk about an investment. I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't understand, but because I did. Completely. And I knew. This was the moment everything shifted. The meeting happened 2 weeks later. San Francisco, a glass building that reflected more sky than structure. I wore the only blazer I owned. Bought secondhand. Years earlier. It still fit. Inside the conference room, there were 3 people. Calm. Focused. The kind of people who didn't waste words. They had already done their research. They knew my numbers, my growth, my retention rate, things no one in my family had ever asked about. They didn't ask me why I left school. They didn't ask if I was figuring things out. They asked about scale, about infrastructure, about vision. And for the first time in years, I wasn't defending myself. I was explaining something I had built, something real. The offer came quickly, a Series A investment, 8 figures. I remember sitting there, looking at the number, not feeling excitement. Not at first, just stillness. Because everything I had done, every late night, every quiet decision, had led to this moment. And no one who had doubted me was in that room. I signed, calmly, carefully, and when it was done, nothing changed on the outside. I flew home, went back to the same apartment, the same routines. My grandmother still needed help in the morning. Dinner still needed to be cooked. The world didn't suddenly recognize anything. And I didn't tell anyone. Not my mother, not my sister. Not yet, because I had learned something over the years. Timing matters more than truth. And the timing wasn't right. Not yet. A few weeks later, an email arrived. Subject line: Forbes 30, under 30, logistics. I read it once, then again. They wanted to feature Juniper Labs. A full profile, interview, photo, publication date, November 27th, Thanksgiving. I stared at the screen. Longer than I should have. Not because I was surprised, but because something about it felt precise, like 2 completely separate worlds were about to collide. I didn't plan it, didn't request it, but the timing was perfect. That same week, my mother called. Unusual. She rarely called me directly. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice softer than usual. "What if you went back to school?" I leaned back in my chair. "I'm fine where I am." A pause. "Where are you, Ivy?" she asked. "Doing what?" There it was. Not curiosity. Control. The need to define something before it defined itself. "I'm working," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. "You know what people say about you, right?" she continued. "They feel sorry for you." The words didn't hit the way they used to. Not anymore, because for the first time, I knew something they didn't. "I'm okay with that," I replied. Silence. Then the line went dead. No goodbye, no resolution, just distance. The kind that had always been there. Thanksgiving came quickly that year. The same house, the same table, the same people, 30, maybe more. Conversations overlapping, laughter filling spaces that had never really changed. I walked in, helped my grandmother to her seat, and everything felt exactly the same. Familiar, predictable, safe, in a strange way. My mother greeted guests, moving through the room like she always did. Perfect posture, measured smile, telling stories, curating moments, and I knew I was still one of those stories. Dinner was called. Everyone took their places. Glasses clinked, chairs adjusted. My mother stood at the head of the table. "I just want to say how proud I am," she began. Her voice warm, practiced. She spoke about my sister, her achievements, her promotion, everything a mother could display with pride. Then her eyes moved, slowly, until they landed on me. And Ivy, that slight tilt of the head, that expression, familiar. "We're just glad you're here." A few quiet nods around the table, polite smiles. The kind people give when they don't know the full story, or think they already do. I didn't respond, didn't need to. Because under the table, my phone vibrated. Once, then again, not just mine. Others, across the room. A subtle shift. People reaching for their screens. Brows tightening. Eyes scanning. And in that moment, before a single word was spoken, I felt it. That change in the air. The one I had felt years ago, walking into that backyard. But this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't about a story being told. It was about a story being exposed. And within seconds, everything they thought they knew about me was about to disappear. At first, no one said anything. That's how truth enters a room sometimes. Not with noise, but with silence. Uncle Rob was the first to react. He pulled his phone slightly away from his face, as if distance might change what he was seeing. Then he looked up, not at the room, at me, Ivy. My name didn't sound the same coming from him. It carried something new, uncertainty mixed with recognition. Is this you? Every conversation in the room faded, not abruptly, just one by one, like lights dimming across a stage. What is it? Someone asked. No one answered, because by then, more phones were out, screens glowing, fingers scrolling, eyes widening. I stood where I was, not moving, not explaining, because for the first time, I didn't need to. Aunt Linda leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. Oh my God! She turned her phone toward the others, and there it was. A photo. Professional. Clear. Unmistakable. Me. Not the version they had been describing for years, but the one they had never seen. Next to it, a headline. A company acquisition. $47 million. The words didn't need emphasis. They spoke for themselves. Across the room, people began to look up, from their phones to me, then back again, as if confirming reality. My sister took Craig's phone. Read it once. Her hand dropped slowly to her lap. She didn't speak. She couldn't, because something deeper than surprise had settled in. Understanding. My mother was the last to react. She stood in the center of the room, watching faces shift around her, trying to read the current the way she always had. What is everyone looking at? She asked. No one answered her. My father walked over quietly, held out his phone. She took it, and I watched her face change. First, confusion, a slight frown, eyes narrowing. Then, recognition. Her posture stiffened, her grip tightened. And finally, something I had never seen on her before. Fear. This isn't real, she said. But her voice didn't believe itself. It's Forbes, Uncle Rob said softly. And TechCrunch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room already knew. My mother looked at me, really looked this time. Not as a problem to manage, not as a story to shape, but as something she could no longer control. You built this, she asked. I nodded. A simple motion. No pride, no anger, just truth. And you didn't tell us. The question hung in the air, fragile, misplaced. Because even now, she was asking the wrong question. You never asked what I was building, I said. My voice was steady, calm. You only ever told people what I wasn't. No one interrupted, because everyone in that room had heard those words before. Just not from me. A shift moved through the space. Subtle, but undeniable. People weren't just seeing success. They were seeing context. Years of it. My grandmother's voice came from the end of the room. Soft, but clear. She left school to take care of me. All heads turned, not toward me, toward her. I had a stroke, she continued. And she was the only one who came. No emotion in her voice. Just facts, the kind that don't need decoration. The kind that settle heavily when they've been delayed too long. My mother didn't speak. Couldn't. Because for the first time, she wasn't ahead of the story. She was inside it, and it was moving without her. Ivy tried to tell the truth, my grandmother added. But no one listened. A pause. Then, quietly, because someone else was speaking louder, the room held its breath. My father stepped forward. Not far, just enough. It's true, he said. 2 words. But from him, they carried weight. Years of silence, compressed into a single moment. My mother's shoulders dropped slightly. Not dramatically, just enough to reveal something underneath. Not control, not confidence, but collapse. She sat down slowly. No performance this time, no careful positioning, just stillness. "I was trying to protect the family," she said. Her voice was smaller now, uncertain, from what Uncle Rob asked quietly. She didn't answer, because there was no answer that would survive in that room. Silence settled again. But it was different now. Not empty, full of everything that had gone unsaid for far too long. I looked around the table, at the same faces that had once believed a version of me I no longer recognized. And I realized something. This moment wasn't about proving them wrong. It wasn't even about being seen. It was about something much simpler, taking back ownership of my own story. "I didn't build any of this for you," I said. Not harsh, just honest. I built it because I needed a place where the truth could exist. No one argued, no one defended, because there was nothing left to defend. I picked up my coat, walked over to my grandmother, unlocked her wheelchair, and together we moved toward the door. No one stopped us. No one tried, because some moments don't need resolution. They just need to happen. And as I stepped outside, into the cold evening air, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not relief, but something quieter, something steadier, freedom. Because for the first time, the story they told about me was no longer the one that mattered. If you look at this story, not as a dramatic family moment, but through the lens of human behavior, there's something important happening beneath the surface. In many families, there is an invisible structure. No one announces it. No one agrees to it out loud, but it exists. There is often someone who carries the image, and someone who carries the weight, the one who reflects success, and the one who absorbs everything that doesn't fit. Over time, that pattern becomes familiar, and familiarity can be mistaken for truth. What happened to Ivy wasn't just about being misunderstood. It was about what happens when a narrative is repeated long enough that even good people stop questioning it. That's the part most viewers don't notice right away, because it's uncomfortable. It forces a deeper question. Not just who was wrong, but how often do we accept a story simply because it's easier than asking for the truth? Now here's what makes Ivy's response different. She didn't fight the narrative directly. She didn't try to win people over with explanations. And she didn't destroy anyone when she finally had the chance. Instead, she built something that existed outside of their version of her. That choice matters more than the success itself. Because when someone has been misrepresented for years, the natural reaction is either to shrink or to strike back. Both are understandable, but neither creates freedom. What Ivy did was something harder. She separated her identity from their opinion. And when the truth finally surfaced, she didn't use it as a weapon. She used it as a boundary. That distinction is where real maturity lives. Not in proving people wrong, but in no longer needing them to be right. So if you found yourself somewhere in this story, maybe not in the same details, but in the feeling, then it might be worth asking yourself one quiet question. Where in your life have you been allowing someone else to define who you are? And more importantly, what would it look like to step outside of that? Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily and on your own terms. And if stories like this help you see things more clearly, or simply remind you that you're not the only one who's felt this way, take a moment to like this video and consider subscribing to the channel, because sometimes the right story doesn't just pass time. It gives you language for something you've been carrying for years. And once you can name it, you can begin to change it. I'll see you in the next story.